How do any of us speak of what Judge Ludwig described as shared hopes and dreams for America? First, as we have been talking about, we must listen and learn all we can about the movement and people within it. The second important thing we can do is challenge the movement. But how? How do we do that? Here are 4 things. We vote, confront, speak, and refuse. Vote and elect people willing to speak out. Some have called voting our sacred right. In a democracy, we choose our elected leaders by going to the polls. This is why voter suppression, redistricting, and voting laws to restrict the number of people who can vote all are such a danger to democracy. We need elected leaders who create the laws and judges who enforce the laws to be people who will speak out and challenge this movement. Be public and confident in confronting misinformation and lies. The more we learn about the movement, the more we listen to what they are saying, the more we will recognize misinformation and lies. And when we hear them, we must challenge them and confront people who are spreading it all. Speak truth with respect and compassion. To call out misinformation and lies does not compromise respect and compassion. How we call it out might, so we must be careful in how we do it. I believe all people deserve respect and compassion. That's why calling it out is one way to save them from themselves, if we can, and to keep other people from accepting what they say. Refuse to be their enemy. We must challenge the movement and its leaders without seeing them as our enemies. They routinely call people who are outside of their movement enemies and demonize them and call for them to be defeated. But I refuse to do the same. The Reawaken America tour, rooted in Christian nationalism, uses a persecution narrative. In Batavia, I heard one speaker after another build on that story of being victims who are being treated unfairly by the enemy, shouting that their culture, religion, and nation are being destroyed, and they must defend themselves and their country. We witnessed this, especially with white Christian nationalists for whom Jewish people are enemies. The language of one speaker was typical. The storm is upon us. We win, they lose. We are at war on a wartime basis. They are evil enemies of freedom. War has been declared. The media is aiding and abetting the enemy. This was a call to arms, to rise up and fight for freedom. The organizers and leaders of this movement deny that they encourage violence, even though speakers regularly use the rhetoric of warfare and enemies and the mission. The main speaker and organizer was always referred to as the General Michael Flynn, who PBS Frontline describes as raising an army of God to fight a holy war. One charge against this movement is that they foment hate, but they deny it. They use, however, the language of hate, at least language that makes people on the other end of it feel like they are hated. Words like enemies and evil and perverted and demonic and socialist, meant, of course, in a derogatory way. We must challenge them about racism, violence, hate. All of it is present in this movement. How can people who are Christian, people who claim to follow Jesus, how can they use racism, violence, and hatred to stir people to action? This movement calls for people to take back our country. They are praying for America to become a Christian nation again, under laws and a government that operates by what they call Christian principles. None of this makes sense to us, some of us, and it must all be challenged. Another claim to challenge is that the founders never intended for there to be a wall of separation of church and state. Really? Here is what Thomas Jefferson said: erecting the wall of separation of church and state is absolutely essential in a free society. And not just the founders. Teddy Roosevelt said, I hold that in this country there must be complete severance of church and state, that public monies shall not be used for the purpose of advancing any particular creed, and therefore that the public schools shall be non-sectarian and no public monies appropriated for sectarian schools. And then there's John F. Kennedy. I believe in an America where the separation of church and state is absolute, where no Catholic prelate would tell the president, should he be Catholic, how to act. I do not speak for my church on public matters, and the church does not speak for me. The same should have been true for Donald Trump as president. Even Ronald Reagan, who used to be the Republican president to emulate, said, "We established no religion in this country. We command no worship. We mandate no belief, nor will we ever. Church and state are and must remain separate." Christian nationalists say, never mind what Jefferson, Roosevelt, Kennedy, or even Ronald Reagan had to say about it. Never mind that the Constitution says no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office. Never mind that the First Amendment says Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or the free exercise thereof. Why is this so important to Christian nationalists? Because the narrative they have heard repeatedly says that Christians must make the laws and govern the nation by biblical principles, as they understand them, of course. It's something called dominionism. It means that Christians must take dominion, take power over the nation if it is to be saved, in their view. In recent years, a theory called the 7 mountains of influence has taken hold. The 7 spheres of influence are these: family, business, media, church, education, arts, and government. And what they say is that only when Christians are in charge of running it will America be saved. And they believe that with all their hearts.